1.3 of the agenda. Any items not on the agenda?
No, we have no further items to add.
Right, thank you. Conflicts of interest relating to anything that is on the agenda. No one? No. Confirmation 1.5. I'll take those as being read. Are there any matters arising from those minutes? Please. Look. I'll shoot that look.
I'll second.
Thank you. No matters arising from those minutes. Everyone in agreement?
Yes.
Thank you very much. 2.1, application for community grants fund Thames-Coromandel. Again, I'll take June to read the item. Who's on there to present that one? Page 61.
Shari, knows that she's on.
Yeah, she's on Teams.
She's what?
She's on.
She's on Microsoft.
Oh, hi Shah.
I'm here. Morning.
Morning, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Shah, I'll allow you to just present the report, thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you straight.
I'll allow you to present the report, thank you.
Okay, so we received a request from Diane Connors, Chairperson of Steampunk the Thames Incorporated, requesting that the Thames Community Board consider a request for the costs of hiring the Civic Centre. In previous years, the Economic Development Team have done that for them, but they have indicated they have no funds available this year. So we gave the Steampunk $6,000 in the last community grant round, $2,500 of which they used in their mini festival in November. The balance of $3,500 will be used in April. So in addition to that, they are requesting the board consider the $1,050 for the hire of the Civic Centre.
Thank you, Shah. It's not unusual that sometimes you receive applications like this in terms of waiving board hire for specific events that may be important to the town. And in the past, the chair has had discretion in relation to being able to agree or disagree on these things. I think that discretion is no longer available in terms of my decision making, but the board needs to make a decision on this. So if we can go around, is there any, you have a suggested resolution in relation to this item? Is there any discussion relating to that resolution from the board? Are we in agreement or disagreement? Thank you, Mark.
How much is, oh, it says it doesn't,
$1,050.
but it says it's 3,782 currently available.
Up until the end of June.
And is it,
Yes.
Yeah, because we know that she's actually got feedback on the money.
I know you can welcome feedback, but. So, do we have the extra money, that money that's sitting in that community grant, do we obviously always make sure that we spend it, but we try to make sure we've got some left in the month or two beforehand, or what's the normal process for spending it?
Sometimes there isn't any because we've allocated it all at the beginning. I think we've got used to the idea that it's useful to have some in store and for these kind of occasions. And who knows what might come. We've got another one, it's our round beach hop.
That's right, so
So it's just a matter of, we're already into March.
So if we approve this one and the beach shop, we essentially have nothing left.
It'll be close enough, $100.
Yeah. And if anyone's organising an event from now to June, if they haven't got their funding sorted, so we could wait and end up there. So it's you never know for sure.
And regardless of the COVID disruptions, both events I see as being, great events for a town.
I'm just wondering if we have a criteria for waiving this, because other groups may come to us and say, well, you did it for them, why don't you do it for me, and do we need some kind of parameters around it?
Well, in the past, it didn't necessarily have to come from a discretionary fund or from a community grant, the wavering of all fees, as I understood. In the past, it just meant that, there was a budget adjustment relating to the fact that we reduced probably the expectation of what fees we might collect from the hall or not. We had that discretion.
Donna's.
Yeah.
Through the chair, our straight load, it's always been, so we can't waive the fees because the fees have already been budgeted and we've already rated for it. If we waive them, who's going to pay? All the other ratepayers are going to pay for it, and that's not, that's kind of what we have to do is we need to use some other funding, which is why in the past we've used the grants or the community board's discretionary funding to do this. We've never been able to waive.
So you need an audit trail, basically. An audit trail, well, you need an audit trail of transactions, and that's why it actually, is a deliberate arm's length transaction relating to being a community grant from our discretionary fund to allow the waiver of. Fair enough. Thank you. So you have a resolution in front of you. Can we put that to the vote? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point, Cheryl, about, other groups may say, why didn't you waive it for us? But then I guess that's what that community grant application process is for, and there's always groups that we say yay or nay to. So, yeah. You look like you're having something to say.
I just wanted to say around the community grants and when we not talk about where those who had come full funding over the many years that we've done for building change a little bit. And the fact that they have continued to come to knock on full funding.
Rolling
and
over.
there would be opportunity for others to come for funding. Did we not discuss that during community grants time? Because this is like a second bite of the cherry.
Yes, well, it's a discretionary bite of the cherry, and I think the reality is that the community grants, as far as I'm concerned, do need a review. And I don't know if we can do it pre-July 1, because we've got things like the youth centre, citizens advice, etc. are on 3-yearly contracts, if my information is correct, they're running out. So we will have to decide in the LTP what we're doing with those organisations and who should have those and who should have access to the criteria, how much is that, because that's ratepayers' money. So I think the whole thing needs to be looked at, because at the moment people that know how to do it the best get the money. And that's what's true, I suppose, in society. So I think that's for a bigger discussion at a workshop, but I'd like to highlight it, that it's an area that's murky at this point in time. And I think we'll have an LTP process, and then we'll have a whole lot of people expecting to get their checks, and we haven't got a contract with them because it ran out. And so I think it's a messy area.
Yes, that's
Through
right.
you, Mr. Chair, the LTP simply has a budgetary allocation for discretionary grants and board grants and so on. So per the community board, how you allocate it is up to you. It's not specified in the LTP.
Cool. So
But I'm happy to arrange to bring to a workshop what the existing allocations are, who's getting what, for those that have contracts when they expire, and so that you are well placed for the beginning of the new financial year to look at what you want to do.
You said that so well.
Exactly. I mean, the history of it was we did have allocated areas like events like 10,000, whatever it was, 30,000 for community grants and so on. So it was all amalgamated into one. I think it was $60,000 or whatever the figure is. The current grants, and then just picking up on your point, Sheree, is that in an ideal world, yes, it would be wonderful to think that some of the events can become self-supporting in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, as you specified, whatever it might be, and that they're not having to rely on community grants every year for these events, because they become self-supporting in that sense. But in an ideal world, that's great. But if the event is a major contributor to the economic value and social value of our town, that's the thing that we have to consider any of these grants and whether they're competing themselves too much or not. So all of those aspects are really important. So, yeah, that's just highlighting that.
To put a stake in the ground, I think steampunk is important. I think there's a whole lot of evolution going on, and there's another whole one called solar punk, and they didn't come to us yet. And so I personally would support this now and encourage us being very clear going forward. That's my vote.
Thanks, Sally. Happy to move that.
I think from my point of view, sorry?
Yeah.
From my point of view, we have had requests in the past after the grant round. We have had requests in the past for assistance. For instance, Wings and Wheels asked us for assistance, and we would all agree, I think, the Wings and Wheels is a fantastic event for Thames, etc., but we just said, well, no.
Yep, we did.
And so you kind of think, well, we said no there, but we say yes here. It's just,
We need to be consistent. We need to be consistent.
Sure.
But what's consistent
Well, that's why we need some kind of parameters around it.
And I think that often there's been the tendency to say, right, well, an event that's got, people turning up with planes or cars or whatever, and there's an opportunity to generate money that way, as opposed to an event where they might be trying to provide some free entertainment as part of that event that has to be paid for somehow. And so you've got that balance between, not being able, there's not the potential revenue stream for that event, whereas for other events, if you can put a fence up and charge people to get in, then you've got opportunity to make money. So, yeah, it's a difficult balance.
How about I move the resolution, and we'll either get a second or we won't, and then we can go from there. So I'll move it.
I'll see.
So you move to approve?
Yes.
And those in favour, say aye or raise your hands. It's going to be a close vote on.
Aye.
Four.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm actually not sure. So can I abstain? Thank you.
so what that does highlight is Cheryl's point, that, with my struggle is the struggle of the consistency.
And that's
I guess I'm looking for a black and white world, which doesn't exist out in a grey world, but anything that we can do that can take us to a point where we can make a consistent decision around these sorts of things. That's what I was suggesting.
Chair, maybe it might be worthwhile, again, we could revisit this in a workshop around events, because we do have a major events fund, and there is some criteria around that. The likes of Steam Park, they have applied to the major events fund. Historically, we do have all the data over the last 4 to 5 years as to how much we've contributed to that event, and also in kind with, promotion, marketing, all of that sort of stuff, and that can give a bit more context what we say is with the parameters of the major event fund, you've got to demonstrate that you've been able to bring a certain amount of people and implement for the local economy, which the steampunk group have done year on year. We've done over the last 4 years, it's received a good $100,000 that we've contributed to steampunk. Big supporter of it. We keep saying they need to go out from other sources of funding. Council also had this perception around having to pay for or contribute to the road management, and that isn't a council activity, that's actually a legislative activity. So it might be worthwhile talking about, what major events funding is, what that contributes to, and then what we say to some events like the steampunks is, look, go to your community board because it doesn't fit our criteria. You may be able to get some additional funds from your local board.
Everything.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you.
Perhaps that we can roll up together and it's a.
Yeah, I think we'll put together a workshop package that brings the major events fund information for the Thames area and the criteria, and then what your board funding has been allocated to and is committed to, and then we can have a discussion about whether you want to establish some criteria for next year.
Yeah.
That would be really good because some of
Yeah.
the Thames events miss that criteria because of the district impact we want from our events funding. So Thames has always been hard to struggle to actually bring it to the fore in terms of some of that district criteria that we want in terms of an event funding. So that would be a great thing to actually have a discussion about it. Thank you. So move on to the next item. Thank you, Shah.
Yeah.
If you're still there, thank you.
Welcome.
So this again is an events application. I've got Kirsten Richmond, who's our district events coordinator online, and Sir Helen O'Halloran from the Business Association, who we've been in discussions with around bringing this to Thames. So just a little bit of context, Beach Hop, as you're well aware from the report, just the amount of money that it contributes to the district. We do support Beach Hop through our major events fund, but as you know, it's very much Whangamata focused, and in the last few years they have taken an entourage up to Whitianga, and that has been supported by the local community board through its discretionary fund, and that's what. Kirsten, how many people have been up there in the last 2 years?
They take up to 1,000 vehicles, but the day out itself has a crowd of about 5,000 to 6,000 people in Whitianga. What we're hoping for in Thames is that if we can really promote it, in our neighbouring towns, Paeroa, Ngatea, South Auckland, for example, I think we'll get a lot of day trippers come to Thames for the day.
So what we're proposing is that instead of going to Whitianga this time, that it would come to Thames. And as I say, this was in the last few years that was supported with the board's discretionary fund, which is why we're coming this time to the Thames. Like you said, they have the same appetite.
Well, it's been such a successful event, and that for you to be able to expand, some criteria related to it to involve Thames is a wonderful opportunity for us. That's the way I look at it. And so I'm in full support of the resolution that we could move around the community board and see what everyone's thinking about it.
Yes, I did. Just going back briefly to Greg's presentation, I found a little bit incongruous the losing Lizard Parks and potentially in Mary Street, and then bringing 1,000 cars in for the beach hop and parking them down Collins Street. And I'm just worried that this report talks about attracting 8,000 people to town for the day. The only feasible way for those people, because there's no transport to get into town, is cars. So we've got 1,000 cars in the parade, and assuming 2 or 3 people per car from the people coming and visiting, there's another 2,000 or 3,000 cars. Where are we going to put 4,000 cars?
Good problem.
Through the chair, they have been doing the tour to Whitianga for the past, I think, 3 or 4 years, and there would be 5,000 to 6,000 people on that day in Whitianga, which is a lot smaller area than Thames. So we'd be hoping that people that did need to bring their cars would be parking in surrounding streets and walking through to Pollen Street, and obviously, walking from home if they are Thames residents.
Mine will come on bicycles.
Okay.
Hopefully.
I just still think it's going to be a huge, I think there's a little bit of a risk to us that it's going to cause chaos for the day, but that's just my personal opinion.
That's why we have the professional traffic management people to work out those plans to see where, the cars need to fit. So that's what their professional job is to do, is to make sure that that's smooth and effective. They do it in Whangatara every year, and as we say, it has been worked well in Whitianga for the last few years.
But we'd have to approve this for that traffic management plan to go ahead.
Yes.
But no, hang on, if we don't approve this and the traffic management plan doesn't go ahead,
Then we
this is happening.
No, it won't happen.
It won't happen.
No, that's why we're asking for the support to make it happen in Thames this year.
Is this so this is the first time it's come to Thames?
Yep.
Am I right?
Yes.
Is there a guarantee that if it comes here and successful, that it'll come here next year? Is this the beginning of a gravy train for us?
So, through the chair, yes, the discussions I've had with Beach Hop is that if the event is successful in Thames this year, we are going to look at doing 1 year in Whitianga and then the following year in Thames, and just rotate it. The feedback from the participants who go to Beach Hop is that they are looking for something different. They don't want to be doing the same run every year. So if we could mix it up 1 year in Whitianga and 1 year in Thames, that would be an ideal solution. You'd also, get different spectators, a different group of people.
Thanks for that clarification. Thanks, Peter. That's a good question. So,
I think it's going to
we've
be
got a
huge
mover for the recommendation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge for Thames.
Sheree?
No.
You're right. So, do you want me to move it? I'll move the resolution. To approve, yeah. Second. Those in favour? Those against?
Can do this.
What was yours?
I'm going to say.
Thank you, Chief. Turns around. Thank you. Cheers.
Did you look at any of the cars?
This is
3.1.
On Thames, you want to ask any questions?
Nicole's on there.
Yes.
She's raising. Nicole will take the report as being read unless there's some specific questions.
So
Okay.
my understanding of this, if I'm just talk out loud, is that this is a transitional lease whilst the relationship and partnership with Ngāti and us and them is finalised, etc. And it makes perfect sense to me. Is that?
Is it common for, I mean, that look to have expired December 2019, is it quite common for leases to kind of roll over while we wait for Sally shaking again? It's not common.
It's just running a little late, I'd say, but maybe there have been other issues going on which have prevented the report coming, which Nicole should be able to answer.
You got any further comment to make about that, Nicole?
No, actually, John should be there as well, just fronting this report because I'm actually homesick, so he's not there.
Very good.
Yeah.
So the Ngāti Tamatara have been consulted in relationship to this lease, have they?
That's correct, and they have approved that way back in 2019.
Right.
So it's just going through the proper channels now just to get signed off by your community board and then through council, and then it can be executed.
Thank you. Can I move and second?
I move we approve.
Second. Sheree. Thank you. Those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? 0.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nicole.
Did you better say?
Go and get well.
Thank you. Thanks.
It's going to be important, making sure that John is online. For this item.
We're hoping he'll be physically here.
Oh, that's even better.
John's on his way over.
Well, we can go to 4.1, so it shouldn't take long. Parking control bylaws, and the infrastructure. Is that the last item we get to?
Well, we do have stuff here.
Got any issues? Straightforward?
Yeah, it's 2 disabilities for mainly the Catholic Church is the main user of Bailey Street, I would have said. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, school as well. Move and second that.
I'll move.
Thank you.
I did just have a question. There was some, in table 1, it talks about, one of the tables it said, and 3, install 3 disabled car parks.
Yeah, I wondered whether it was
So
two.
it's taking out
Yeah.
2 and putting in,
No, it's taking out
Taking
3.
it through, putting it to.
putting in 2. Right. Yeah, the second table 1 says install 3.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
No.
So we're actually reducing it by 1. Is that right?
Yeah, because disabilities one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we move her and second that. Those in favour?
Second.
Thanks, John. Those in favour? Against? Thank you. Welcome, John. If you'd like to just come forward while we do this item, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you, Chairman.
John. 10 Deerfield, site, index 3.2. I'll allow you to present the report, John. That's all right. Working on taking.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman and board members, you'll recall we had a workshop on this late last year to just try and thrash around a little bit about the direction and where we're going to go with this. So this report is a consequence of that and follows up. So what you have before you is a report that proposes that we go out to tender for different sites. A little unusual in the sense that it's, in a more traditional way, we've gone out with a hangar or something, or a defined site. But one of the key feedbacks we got through the process was being some people have an aeroplane that's got a wingspan of this, and some people have a small aeroplane that's got a wingspan of this. So the sort of the notional hangars shown on the Airbiz proposal wasn't going to fit everybody's needs. So we're going on a square metre rate, which allows them to say we need 10 by 12 or 11 by 9 or whatever they might need. And then we'll jiggle things around within the precinct to try and make that fit, to try and give everybody what they need.
Can I ask a question about that? One of the things at the public forum was that we were told that it seemed strange that we were soliciting from the tenderers rather than us saying this is how it's going to be. And so is that your response if I asked you that question?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really responding to that feedback we had that the demand is for different sizes. If we go out with a set size, we're saying that's all that's available. So we automatically would cancel out of the marketplace some people who've got a slightly bigger aeroplane. All right?
So I also just had a question. So in that Public Bodies Leases Act, So there was a number of, there are a number of different options for the leases about how they're put out, and we decided to pick the one which meant it had to go out for tender. Is that correct?
The start point is you start off with the Reserves Act. The Reserves Act gives you two choices for local purpose reserves. It's either that community type use, such as kindergartens, play centres, clubs, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get into that outside of that community type purpose, not for profit type purpose, then the Public Bodies Leases Act kicks in. Right. So then we go to the Public Bodies Leases Act, and the Public Bodies Leases is got a whole. It's a horrible act. There's a whole lot of restrictions around it. For instance, under Section 7, you could have different leases for different terms, but more than half of them, for instance, are for leases in perpetuity. So as officers, we're saying, we don't want to lock up this site forever, 99 years plus, right? It's just, it doesn't make sense. So to preserve the flexibility for us, there's only one that sort of meets the criteria that also doesn't breach the automatic classification of a subdivision under the Resource Management Act. So that's the one we've got in front of you.
And that's got the fish hook, if you like, of having to go out for tender.
Right, now tender's in the next section, okay? The tenders, you say you've got to, there's only one exception. There's only one exception to going out for, you have two choices, I mean, clear. You can either go to auction, or you can go to tender, right? Section 9, however, does provide that you could go out to the market at a price. You could say, we will let that site for $10 and that site for $20. You could do that. And yet people say, it's almost like it becomes a ballot then, we want it. So the best, in my opinion, the best thing for the council to do, which makes the most commercial sense, is to go out to tender. And let the market tell us what it's worth. The difficulty with airfields, and there aren't all that many up and down the country, right? So the valuers all come and look at when they're trying to assess the fair market value of this thing. What do? Well, what do you rent yours for? What do you rent yours for? Okay? And what happens, it's a bit like an incestuous pool. Nobody really knows what these things are worth, right? So I think commercially the most sensible approach is to say, let the market tell us what it's worth.
Right, okay.
And if it works out that it's $10 versus $1,000, well then so be it.
Thank you.
Because the other bit of feedback that I want assurance from you as a non-expert is that the feedback from the public forum was that the understanding of the legislation made it very much a choice rather than an obligation for us to go out to tender.
You do have a choice. You have a choice. You could go out at a fixed price. You have the only other choice you have is whether you go out to auction or tender.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, an opportunity to consult with us about that choices would have been great.
Yeah, it's you don't have a lot of choices. The Act is very limited as what you can and can't do. All right.
But you've identified three choices.
Yeah, auction, tender, or at a fixed price. And the fixed price process would be different because then you'd be calling for applications at that price for that space.
Yes, and what you're telling us is to be commercially for us to get the best response for our ratepayers.
Commercially
is
prudent.
to go out to tender.
Absolutely.
And we'd still have the choice to accept the tender or not, as opposed to an option. If someone comes on and bids for $5 and wins the option, then.
So can I just get my thinking clarified? Because based on what I'm hearing here, it's different to what I understood came out of the workshop. My understanding as a result of the workshop is that if we were to lease, but to get people to sign up on a lease, because this is reserved land, that the lease document either had to be 5 years or shorter, or it had to have a 6-month out clause, or we had to go to tender.
That's what was talked about in the workshop, yes. One of the exceptions to the Public Works Act, the Public Bodies Leases Act procedure, is if you had a 6 months out, get out of jail clause, then you could enter it direct with any party.
Yeah.
If you recall at the workshop, we also talked about the two gentlemen who were interested in having the private hangars.
Yeah.
That was both put to them, they were both offered leases that had that provision, and both declined. Because from their perspective, they're saying, why would I spend $200,000 in building a hangar, knowing that in 6 months' time you could ask me to go?
So my recollection is that presented with those three options, we determined that being able to offer leases that did not have a 6 month constraint or were for shorter than 5 years, that therefore that we would go for the tender. We would tender, because that means the lease could be 25 years, etc., etc. The other benefit was that by going to tender, we were giving ourselves the opportunity to maximise the revenue associated with the tender. Right. Where does that fit into what you're describing about tender, auction, fixed price? So yeah. Can you see what we're? So I'm trying to marry my recollection and understanding of the workshop with what you're now saying is under whatever these acts are. You can do tender, auction, or fixed price.
Yeah. At the workshop, I steered the board to consider tender. That's what was discussed.
Right.
Okay. So we then left the workshop for us to come back and then think about it and put a report in front of the board, which I have today.
So, therefore, in my mind, I can say, well, it makes sense not to have an option. But there is still the option. There is still the option to go to tender or to put out a fixed price thing. If a fixed price thing, the lease still would not have the 6 month fish hook or the 5 year constraint. Is that right? We could, based on the discussion today, we could say, actually, we think doing a fixed price would be okay, and the lease document wouldn't have the constraints of the 6 months and 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Let me just check that one. Yes, you could.
Okay. So in going to tender then, we are making a call to say we're going to tender rather than fixed price because we think it's going to be of commercial benefit to us. So it boils down to that. Because we do have two options under the so that's a change in my thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess also around, like John was saying, around that, what's it worth?
Yeah.
How do you assess that?
Yeah, and I absolutely get it. I absolutely get that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, there's also the option for once the tenders are received, for none of them to be accepted because they're economically not worth it.
Yeah. So can I just ask some questions about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What is the situation wherein if no tenders are received, in other words, nobody applies, what then becomes the default position about what we do with leases of the airfield?
You come back to where you are now with the three choices in front of you. Go out to tender, auction, or at a fixed price.
Right. So we get no tenders in, so we can then say, hey, we're going to lease this stuff now, $10 a square metre. Okay. So the valuation of the tenders is based on a per square metre basis, correct? Right. So person A comes in and tenders at $100 a square metre for a 50 square metre shed. And person B comes in and they tender $75 a square metre for 10,000 square metres. Under tender document, as I read it, our criteria is what is the highest per square metre, irrespective of the size. Yes. So a developer who comes in and looks at this and says, hey, I would like to develop all 7 hangars, and then I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to sublease those, but my offer is 75. We cannot take that offer up if Bob, person A, comes in with a 10 square metre hangar at $150 because the per square metre thing is high. Have I got that understanding right?
But what we would do, the Act directs us, you've got 2 choices. You accept the highest tender or no tenders. Okay, so this situation is a bit different because we're talking about an area of land where we're just saying, well, we don't know how much you want. You might want room for 1 hangar, you might want room for 1 for 10. We don't know, right? So how I approach that, and try and keep the council safe, is to say, Bob's put in his one for $100 and he wants a hangar of 10 by 12. Bob, we're going to award you your one. The next highest offer is Bill, who wants to build 7 hangars for $75.
Okay, so therefore related to that, when person C comes along and you've got all these other hangars there, and they say, I want to build a hangar here, how much are they paying? What's going to be the default rate, if you like, that person C pays, because they didn't tender, but it's 6 months down the track and there's other ones right. What's going to be that situation?
In my view, if Bob has put in $100 for 1 hangar, that's setting the benchmark for subsequent single hangars.
Okay. So what we would be saying then is that the tender price that comes in, that is accepted, becomes the default price for the thing, even though that may be 3 times the price that you can go and build a hangar, lease a hangar space.
Quite possible. Another reason why I think it's also commercially savvy for us to go to tender is because the market will dictate price. That price will be dead caught because the first term under the Public Bodies Leases Act for a 5-year period, that's when the rent review kicks in. So and that's a prescribed process where a valuer is engaged and the valuer assesses the market rent as at that date. So they'll do what they always do, they'll look for market evidence as to what are these things worth. And they'll see that Bob's already been paying $100 a square metre and Bill's been paying $75 a square metre. So that helps us for the whole 20-year term of the lease, not just the short period.
I guess my questions relate to the outliers, the guy who wants to build 7 hangars to the person who really wants to have a hangar down here and will pay the earth because they really want to have a hangar here, but it's an aberration,
So, Mr. Chairman, the simple answer, of course, is that any leasing of any land comes back through the board. So you have the option concerning the report to say, well, Mary here wants to lease another hangar on the undeveloped portion that we haven't already let out. This is the basis that we recommend you do. And you go, well, that's too much. We really want to encourage that. We'll drop it down.
Right. So you don't do a homework in relationship to the value of what rental spaces should be for these types of things?
Let's put it this way, it's an unknown, Mr. Chairman. We are going to uncharted territory because if you look at what they're currently paying, a typical single hangar at the airfield at the moment is about $1,500 per annum. That's a flat screen TV, half a decent coffee maker, it's not a lot of money, but it is a very scarce resource. You can't have a hangar anywhere. It's got to be at an airfield and it's got to be permitted by the district plan and all those things. So it has an intrinsic value. So what we're saying is we don't really know what the market is telling us this is worth. We know other things that are happening. We know that a lot of land around the Ardmore airfield is being gobbled up by housing. That's putting pressure on that airfield. We know that the Whitianga mob have just built and rented out a whole bunch of new hangars, and they've got a waiting list for more. So there are signals of demand out there.
So in terms of that commercial fit, one of the questions I've got in terms of maximising the opportunity is that whether it's too soon for us to go out to tender or do anything until the airstrip itself is addressed, because if the airstrip has a vision relating to what it should be for the Thames airfield, and that work is proposed or designate in terms of what is required, that's going to influence the tender, because the tender then dictates what sort of aircraft you might have, this or that, what's coming in and out of there, and what sort of activities can be expanded in relationship to the types of aircraft that you might want to function through the Thames airport. But for me, that was it's like growing an olive tree, and that's the foundation that stipulates, maximising the opportunity for the airfield. So I just sort of have some questions relating to that aspect of it, the order of the process, where it's going, what you hope to achieve. Fortunately, it's for a cutback through. But certainly by the time you get to accommodation and stuff like that, some of those other things might need to be in place. I'll just put it to you.
Well, those Erin did flag those things for future investment in terms of the infrastructure to service, particularly the accommodation precinct, where they need to have sewage and water and other things. I mean, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg here, isn't there? I mean, by having some hangar development, you're going to stimulate a little bit of interest, put it on the map a little bit, and make people go, oh, it's at Thames, which will probably lead to some pressure to intensify the development.
That's the catalyst of what we're doing in terms of these seven sites. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I would just, you stole my phrase there. I was going to use the chicken and egg, and I think we've come this far, and I think we need to go out to the market and just say, here's the proposal. The airstrip's got good drainage. In the future, we might put some concrete down and do that stuff, but this is what it is at the moment. Get in early, secure a spot, live the dream.
We'll see.
Yeah. We could live the dream or pretend it.
Okay. Any further points of clarification, issues that need to be?
Not so much clarification, but I think for me, what I'm hearing here is in going out to tender, we are charting new territory, right? Your point, we don't know what the land is worth, we're charting new territory. Your comment there, people just talk on the phone and think it's worth this much. This is a way of ascertaining whether the market puts value on the thing and so on. So that's new territory. That's okay. We're pioneers. We've got the parachute we don't have to accept any tender, and if we choose to do that, we still then have the option to go out and say we can go out on a fixed price basis. Here's the fixed price, here's the fixed price. If we chose not to accept any tender or whatever it is, but there might be a really positive outcome. All that links together.
Yep. So all of us have got some good input in there.
Yes. I've just got one more question. Our earlier discussion with some of the airfield users, is that probably best to park that until, I'm just thinking around that plan, it's probably not.
Probably. I think one of the issues of that discussion was having the vision of the plan in place in relationship to maximising the uses and therefore maximising the value of tender processes which you might embark on over the years. And one of those was having regard to that 200-metre setback zone in relationship to activity on the airfield. If you build in that zone, then there needs to be an unoccupied while activity is going on, or do you designate the 200-metre setback zone in relationship to allowing wings on wheels and different activities that might be conducted through So there was some concern from the user group about some of those sort of things, and whether the plan needs to be a little bit more designated in terms of even the commercial areas, in terms of saying, well, you know, this type of commercial activity should be here, or that type of commercial activity should be there within the, you know, spaces that you provided in the master plan.
Mr. Chairman, I am a planning ignoramus. So that's the sort of stuff that we talk with the planners around development.
And there were some valid points that came out of it in terms of the overall vision of the offer that you might end up with for our airfield.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one more thing before you move to considering the resolution. At the moment, the resolution provides for delegation to the chief to accept or not accept any tenders. And the only reason I put that in front of you is because if you have a process where we close and then we wait for the next board meeting, then the next adoption by council, we will stretch out the acceptance of any tenders for another couple of months. So a variation of that might be that perhaps yourself, Mr. Chairman, will sit down with myself to make recommendations to the chief, just to keep things moving.
Sure. All right. Well, you have a resolution that's in front of you. We're at that point where we can discuss that, whether there needs to be any changes to the resolution or not as a result of the discussion. Can we make some furtherance relating to that, whether anyone has any views relating to the resolution and whether in fact it could be better placed with any amendments or as is. Thank you. That must be the way we follow.
Have we already done moving and seconding because we're talking about it, or
no, we haven't done moving and seconding.
Had a designated receiver.
So we do that?
Well, it depends on.
Depends whether you have a recommendation.
Yeah. I think that in terms of what you were saying just before, John, that I think some kind of governance response, the delegation to the chief executive means that we don't have any input until the deal's done, and I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but I'm also, is there some place within that process that the chair could be involved with? I don't know.
Do you want some help? You could say that a subcommittee of comprising XYZ, whoever you want to have on that subcommittee, consider the tenders and make recommendations to the chief executive. And then delegate responsibility for accepting or declining to the chief executive following the recommendations from that subcommittee. That's what you're intending, John, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea, because I think this is a hot issue in town, you know, in terms of the future of Thames. And I think as a responsibility of governance, I think that to have involvement holds us to account and for the decision. So I would move that the subcommittee, do we have to decide who's on that?
Sure, really.
So to me, the chair and the whatever we call the lead. Yeah, so Peter.
Definitely Peter.
Yeah. And how does that sound to the three? I'll move that. The only other question which I think you've put into the air, but it hasn't settled, is your query about your expertise is here and we're ready to vote on that. You're putting another thing up in the air, which is about has the planning and around the structural plan and stuff, is that at a competent level to sustain this tender process?
Yeah, definitely that. And the second point was, that was the first point. And the second point was whether we're maximising the value of the tender process through having an airfield that isn't 24/7, basically, or
That's the
it hasn't
chicken.
reached its.
So what are we going to do about that? Because to me, that has to be somehow sorted, so it's not sort of up in the air all the time.
So, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the first question that was raised, that planning process that's been going on now for 3 years, that's resulted in it now being adopted as part of the operative district plan that provides for the shape and development of the airfield as per the plan that shows those different precincts for different sorts of activities. So any yard type requirements and frontages would have all been considered as part of that plan. You know, I think we could be just getting a little bit on dangerous ground if there's some suggestion to have, like I heard you mention something like 200 metres setback or something or other.
It has been consulted on, and we can only assume that there's some regard to it.
Well,
Yeah.
well, that planning process has been through that. It's been adopted. It's in the district plan.
It's in the district plan,
That's your framework for the development of the airfield.
Yeah.
and any variation would have to be a private plan change to apply for a variation to that, or the council to initiate a plan change. And that's a huge process, given that we've just been through the
And you would have to
exercise.
ask yourself, is it, you know, we're going to look really bad going up through a change in plan, which you just adopted last week, you know?
So can we just, because I think at the end of the day, there was one specific issue that came out. Because whilst, just referring to the meeting we had before, whilst there was the concern about there's nothing on the drawing, if you like, that says this is where aircraft maintenance hangars are, etc., etc. On the plan, it definitely says this is commercial area. So doing aircraft maintenance or whatever it is, we feel it could be in the commercial area. What had been discussed during the consultation was the fact to have air shows, you have to have a 200 metre boundary from the centre of the runway that's clear in case the plane crashes. That line does not appear to be represented on here, and the concern is that, and at a lay level, the concern is that a number of the potential accommodation hangars in their lease agreements might have to have a clause which says, in the event of an air show, you have to go to the beach because the plane might land on you. As a way of addressing that, if in fact those hangars are within the 200 metre thing. So I think that was the one issue. My question is about that is, when we're looking at a lease document like this, does there need to be an aircraft hangar only thing, some clause that says if your hangar is within 200 metres of the runway, then you're not allowed to have anybody in there during an air show vacated. And so that comes to with the resolution, because the resolution's asking us to approve the documentation, and I'm just wondering whether the lease document needs to actually make some reference to that 200 metre line. And secondly, there are some typos on whether we want to get those fixed before later.
Yeah, no, look, that's a draft. There's also some alignment issues, and yeah.
Right.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, yes, we can amend the lease to provide for that when there's air shows on, because they're going to be presumably a fixed number per year maximum, I'm guessing, for that, and then the tenders will see that with open eyes.
Yeah. So I think if we have it in this one, because clearly the hangars we're talking about for the tender at the moment are well outside the 200, but if we have that clause in here, then when this lease document becomes relevant for the hangars that are potentially closer, and also it's in there to remind us when we're looking at the accommodation hangar leases.
So that's excellent, thanks, Peter. So in the suggested resolution, is there anything we need to amend there to
Mr. Chairman, I don't think you need to resolve per se. I've heard clearly what Peter has said. I think it's a good idea. We can simply insert that in the lease document itself.
What you
All
said,
right.
so.
And you'll get back to us and say, show us where you've inserted that. Can you clarify that in terms of when you've done that and get back to us, John, about the fact that it's been inserted in the lease document?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. That's great.
And we're adjusting number 3C around the subcommittee.
Yes, I've just given some wording to Ari. Do you want to read it out, Ari?
Yep.
Because I can't remember it now.
It is a subcommittee comprising board chair, Peters, and board member Peter Rebels be established to consider the tenders received and make a recommendation to the chief executive.
And then a new D, that the chief executive be delegated to accept or decline, so not consider all tenders, because the consideration will be done by that subcommittee, so the chief executive be delegated to accept or decline.
Right.
Bearing in mind that we're both not experts.
No, but you'll at least have the opportunity to make the recommendation.
You won't be the sole tender committee, there will be
No,
other.
staff will be providing you with a report which summarises all the technical information and make sure that you have a level of comfort with it before the CEO signs it off. That's the intent.
Are you happy with that strat or not?
I'm not sure, to be honest. But anyway, that's fine.
What do you want to do with Stu?
I'm not sure whether I'm happy to put myself in the position of, I mean, all we're doing is making a recommendation, really, aren't we, at the end of the day, and the decision is beyond what that recommendation might be. Yeah, I'm happy to be in a position where we can actually relate some feedback. Yeah.
I think it's really important. We've sort
It's
of
just,
got a bit used to the sort of like, to me, government and management is always working together, and management will provide the expertise around what's happened around the lease, and you people are there to cover the community stuff. So to me, it's about those two functions coming together for the best outcome. It's not neither party working in isolation.
No, that's right.
That's how I see that. And at the end of the day, the chief executive is going to make the final decision and recommend that to council, which makes the final decision.
No, you're delegating authority to the chief
So he
executive.
does it.
You're delegating that authority. So remember, this report has yet to go in front of full council. So you will, at the moment, the recommendations that you're making are a recommendation to council. So you do have another bite at considering whether you want to change that again through the councillors.
right. That's a good point, that makes sense.
That's good.
Yeah.
No, it's all good, yeah, thank you.
So we're going to resolve that with those changes?
We are. So do you want those changes reread out to you? No.
It's all good.
Movement sector?
Yeah.
Martin? Two?
Yeah, it's already done.
Yeah.
It's done, sorry.
Great call.
Those in favour?
I,
Against? Thanks, John.
Thank you.
So I think some of you,
Have you done the white one, Greg?
yes, we've done
Right,
it.
we did that one, right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Before we move on to the next, could I just,
thanks for your input there, John, thank you.
can I just acknowledge the work that Michael's done in getting the profile of the airfield and the opportunity of the airfield out there in the Haringey Herald and Facebook and wherever it is, that, because one of the things we said is, hey, we want everybody to know that they can start building hangars, and I think the comms around that has been really, really good, been very thorough, and I've really well seen it, so thanks, Michael.
Cool.
Thank you for saying that. Well done.
Oh, and secondly,
You never said firstly.
no, I didn't, but secondly, we received a letter addressed to the Thames Community Board on the 9th of February signed by Jeff and Stuart Warren. I think we need to formally respond to that. So somebody could draft a letter to us for us to respond.
No. Oh. No, sorry, for the chair, was that circulated, was that the one that I circulated last week?
Yeah, so it's
I
addressed.
believe that we do have a staff member who will be responding to that, Larissa.
Right, okay, well, that's fine, as long as it needs to be responded. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Move on to 4.2. Page 126. Welcome, Bruce. Thank you. So this is our work program. Take it as being read.
Yes.
If you want to highlight anything.
No, I think, no, that's fine, and you're happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Did you have something?
I do, around the toilet block at Thames.
Right.
So at the November meeting, I think it was on track, and now I see that it's off track.
Yep. So I've got Ross in the room, and Ross is, do you want to come up here, Ross? Yes. Ross is obviously the project manager on this one, so he knows a lot more of the detail than I do, so I won't try and talk on things I don't have the detail.
Yeah, I understand that has been a long time coming, been a couple of years in fact, so I'm acutely aware of that. So where we're at the moment, we've engaged a contractor to undertake the work there. However, at this point in time, we're just ironing out the exact scope. Now, what's happened is with the way most things, and John will probably before also reiterate this, it's an old building, and as soon as you start amending things in terms of toilets, you need to go through the building regulations. As soon as you go through the building regulations, you need to basically increase the number of toilets and then reconfigure the whole building layout and all that sort of stuff. So don't panic. We've got a way forward that Kay is very keen on. So we've been dealing with the hall committee, and where their drivers are is that basically they want to uplift the hall so that they can get more membership, they can get more use, they can get more revenue, and that'll then refund the things that they want to do. So one of our key drivers is weddings, wedding venues. So what we're looking at now with the scope is to completely redo the internals in terms of new walls, new ceilings. The ceilings are really old. Strip back the floor, sand that out, redo all the fittings and fixtures, and really give it a good facelift. We also are looking at just reconfiguring where we can without the need for a building consent, the toilets, and particularly one of them we're looking at increasing the size of it. So yes, but the issue is as soon as you go through that formal accessibility standards, the whole front of the hall needs to be rearranged. The floors are substandard, so it just opens wombs. So we're going to have a workaround that will hopefully get the same outcome as they're after, and we're just ironing that out now. So the contractor is aware of it, they're ready. We've got a couple of things to just confirm. The other thing as well is the septic system is not in a good state at the moment. So we're just going through a fixing option for that. So that's just another piece of the puzzle. But we will be looking at starting next month and then having it finished before the end of the financial year so that we spend that money.
So you're saying June?
Yeah, it'll be before that. We'll just have to iron out the exact scope, and then I've got to order the materials and then get built.
Let's say 30 June, and if we under promise and over deliver, that'd be great.
My concern is around rescope, because I've been reading rescope for some time. So, and now you're again saying it's around the scope.
Yep. So it's been
a couple of years.
Yeah, it has.
It's still rescope.
Yep. And it's been unfortunate, and I've been trying to keep Kay in the loop. Some of the rescoping has been around whether the toilet block in the park then gets incorporated as part of the building. Then things change with COVID, and there's a need to reduce some cost. Then rescope things again and again and again. And it is one of those unfortunate situations. I'm confident that they are going to be positive for the community and the hall.
Well, thanks, Ross, for engaging thanks Ross for engaging, the level you're engaging. I hope it's a nice outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I guess it was always a bit complicated because it was involving the toilet in the domain as well as the toilets in the hall, and in some ways probably breaking it into separate things might be a good.
Yeah. It'll speed up what the whole committee are after, and that outcome there will be achieved.
Yeah.
Look at the domain.
Yep.
And then even water, as a council, Thames South Water is red, part of our area. And I can understand the reasons, but it's just, I think as a community board, we have to think, down to up to Mawson's Bay, and also just to acknowledge that the water situation down there is not at all ideal.
Yeah, no, it is through the chair, it is a real challenge. Obviously dealing with those rural schemes, that were originally, generally, such as Thames South, put in by farmers for stock watering. Then you get a lot of little township houses, they all need water, so then they connect on, and then at some point in time, the farmers who used to run the water supply and go out and fix it, they're getting older, they don't want to do that. They talked to their friendly councillor years ago, who then decides, we'll take over this water supply, some of their councils, and it makes sense to understand. Things have changed, especially in farming. Farming's more of a business now, and they're focused on farming, not on fixing water pipes.
Yeah.
So of course now it's with council, then we have regulations change, and something now we need to provide drinking water to all these people. So yeah, it's a challenge, definitely a challenge, but we'll get there. It's just going to take a little while.
Thank you. Any other matters arising from the work program? Totra Valley extensions.
Yeah, so Totra Valley extension, I can't say too much about that because they're in the middle of a tender evaluation process. So they've got some tenders in. They've done some evaluations. They want to speak with me later this week, the tender evaluation team, about which way they go, because there's always options around. When you're doing any project, it's all about time versus cost versus quality, and so then there's always an offset of time with quality, time with cost. So often you can get things a bit cheaper, but then it's going to take longer, and it's just trying to get that balance right and juggle that. And so they're working through that tender evaluation process at the moment before we make a final decision and award the works. So yeah, but we can let the board know as soon as we've kind of got through that stage. Give you a bit of an update on how things went.
I just had a query under wastewater under consent renewals. That the Matarani and Cooks Beach one, just lumped in with that.
Yes, it's a district, because wastewater is a district activity, so we have consent renewals across the whole district. Right. So yeah, that's what they're in there mentioning areas that aren't in community teams. So we just use the same comments going each of them.
No lead issues emerged?
No, so I can talk about that a little bit if you want, if you're interested. So we do a lot of testing, for drinking water standards compliance every week on all our supplies. So there's multiple tests are taken every week and sent off to the water care labs to be tested. Lead isn't one of the things that you test for regularly, so it's something that you test for periodically. So it's historically there's been very low levels of lead in any of the water in the district, and so it's not something you test for all the time. You might test every kind of 5 years just to do a double check, and there's no requirement that you test regularly. Obviously, if you test and you find you've got an issue, you need to jump onto it and deal with it. So, but in light of the recent Dunedin stuff that's happened, we have commissioned a full suite of all our suppliers to go through and do all the lead and metals testing, just to kind of provide that assurance to us. So. Because it's probably been 5 years since we've last done a suite of testing across the area, but
those reassurances of the light of what's going on.
Yeah.
Somebody's raised it with you.
Yeah, and I don't know the details of obviously I don't know the details of what's actually gone on in Dunedin. We don't know exactly what's actually happening down there, where it's coming from. There always is the situation that in older townships you can have lead pipes. Now we actually shouldn't really have any lead pipes mains in Thames because of the age. They would have been renewed by now, but there's definitely the chance that there could be lead pipes from our mains to houses, so what we call the lateral, that takes the water from the main to the house. So quite often they used to use lead pipes years and years ago to the houses, so there might be a few of those still out there. And generally they're fine, but it's always hard to know if they are or not, because back in the day when they built those houses, they didn't write down all the details. And if you look at a little plan, there'll be like a square box of the house and there's a line going through that says water connection, and that's it. There's no details, like seriously, that's what it is. And it's like, plumber in the day drew it with his sexy bear and his pencil, and that's basically all we've got. So yeah, but as far as the mains, there should be very, very few lead mains left in any of our townships.
No, thanks for that. That's really good to hear. But that, so at what point is council responsible? So you're responsible all the way up to the water meter?
So we're responsible, yeah, at the boundary, yeah.
So if someone has got lead pipes and they're drinking water with lead, they're not going to know about it, and you guys aren't, no one's really going to know about it. There's not really a way apart from testing every single household.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. It's apart from someone saying, look, I'm not sure what my pipe is, I need to get a water test. And they can get that, the lab will send a bottle out to them and they can get it tested. What there is though is there's a thing called flumbo solvency.
Sorry, yeah.
Flumbo solvency.
Oh yeah.
So what that is that the water in New Zealand generally is very soft. It's not hard like water over in Europe. A lot of areas is very hard. So when the water's soft, I'm getting off topic from the work program, sorry, but into the classroom. When the water's very soft, it's nice to drink. We have nice, beautiful, soft water in New Zealand generally. But what happens when the water's soft is that it is aggressive to soft metals. And so metals like copper, and particularly lead, which is a soft metal, and it can kind of attack that metal, and then you end up with some metals, in the water. Yeah. So basically, the advice from the Ministry of Health, which has been around for, it's probably been 10 or so years now when they first kind of jumped onto this. It didn't historically used to be a problem because all our fittings were made in New Zealand and they were made from quite hard metals, but we get a lot of fittings now out of China, Italy, which historically has quite hard water, Israel, different places like that, and the fittings are more easily degraded by the soft water in New Zealand. So what we do is we put out notifications periodically to say, and everyone in the country has to do this. The advice from the Ministry of Health is because the water's sitting in all your taps and fittings overnight, every morning just flush a mug full of water out, so that first kind of 500 millilitres of water, just water a plant with it or something like that, don't drink it. So that's the advice from the Ministry of Health. So we put some information out there periodically about that, and so yeah, so that's the way around dealing with potentially if you've got a short section of lead pipe, maybe you flush a little bit more out. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry about the nice classroom.
You people not read the things that you get from the council. They like to send them news that are out there every couple of months. I believe that in there recently.
Yeah.
People need to read your emails.
There's probably made a lot of councils sit back and think, and water quality issues throughout the country.
Yeah, it definitely causes you to rethink. And the other thing I should say is that we years ago put in place a procedure with the lab about escalation for any results which come in over any levels, that they should do, whatever they are, is around how they notify and escalate it. So obviously our stuff all goes through Veolia as a contractor, and so they've got an escalation procedure where they've got 3 different numbers that they call an email to make sure they get through to someone, and then if they still can't get any response saying thank you, we've got the results, Mr. Watercare Labs, then they go through the phone tree to call up to the management and Veolia and stuff. So we've got that kind of landed. So hopefully, touch wood, we never end up in the situation where you get an email that sits in a box for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome, it's been important.
Any other questions?
Any other questions related to the work program? No? Mover and seconder?
Yeah.
Shall move, Peter? Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross.
Okay.
Good.
5.1 action schedule. a few comments relating to our public forum.
So, we were circulating the response from Ed to Clancy Nixon. I just want to question as to whether we are happy with that response, given the various public fora we've had that you have represented about the speed limit along the road there, and whether just pushing it back to Clancy to make contact with NZTA and he's the person, whether that is, to me it felt like a fob, and whether in fact we should be asking that there's more assistance and more advocacy, I suppose, from Council to NZTA about that issue. Next question.
Well, it's an excellent question. It really is. I felt the same. And given that the issue has been around for a few years, there's been a lot of work done in that space. And our concerns as a community in relationship to that strip, so to speak. How can we as a community board ask the case with NZTA? What's the process? And I'd like staff to actually consider maybe what some process that we might be able to engage in to further it basically if we can. Or whether it's going to just mean diddly squat, but unless you actually at the end of the day make some effort. I think there was an effort a few years ago. When Peter French was hot on the tail of this issue, I think.
Yes. Yes, no, Chair. So we've had discussions with NZTA about it, so it's not a situation where it's never raised with NZTA and just trying to follow it off onto a private individual. Ari's just flicked the email, thank you, Ari, so I just had a quick read of it. So apologies if Ed's email is a little bit brief. He's responded to the customer. That's always a challenge for me with communication, so it's definitely What's the second email? Okay.
You sent a more in-depth one that was forwarded to the board.
Okay.
Was attached.
Do you see that one? Yeah, thank you. So there is quite a lot of information in there. Yeah.
I think the board would like to feel that if there's a case that we can present, the board would like to feel that if there is a case that it can present to NZTA,
yeah,
and to our representative Tony Fox,
yes,
take forward for us.
Yeah.
And most of the work's been done. What would be involved in putting that case forward and us endorsing it, sort of saying, look, we really want some action on this.
Yeah, well, I think
that's reasonable, that reason.
Yeah, no, I totally wouldn't say. I guess my thoughts on that is there's nothing stopping you as the chair definitely to have a letter written, which we can help with, a letter that goes, to NZTA with your name on it, saying the community board has discussed this, numerous times we've had public, public presentations of people regarding this. We really want to stress that this is a high priority for the Thames community. It's not our road, but as the community board, we're really keen that this is given the due attention that it needs. So, I don't know yet.
And that will be enough, you think? Well, that will all the information.
Well,
the files now, wouldn't they?
We can easily send it to them again. We can say, here's the letter, here's the attachment. I wouldn't even say it's going to be enough because it's not always how it works. But I know it feels a little bit, it's pretty soft sending a letter, but I think that's definitely something.
Well, if we can attach some of that.
Yeah, attach information.
Because there will be information there that is quite extensive.
Yeah, a lot of work has been done as attached, and with something we had serious about it, really like to see a change.
I mean, even the stuff that you've got in your last minutes, from previous
for us to contact NZTA.
So I think it's potentially you do both, you know, so Tony's already done that. Last year, we did like a roundup around the boards and see who your priorities. Areas where you want to make the changes, and I imagine that the Thames Community will put forward as one. So he'll be doing that, but all I'm doing is often, what we talked about before, just trying to offer multiple tactics.
And that committee that Tony's on has sort of like an action list of people's needs and desires. And like, for example, the one-lane bridges across the other side have just got on that report. And cynic or not, you know, like every bit helps.
I think you mentioned, I think you'd say, you know, we understand our representative on the Transport Committee, Tony, Councillor Tony Fox, has raised this. We just want to reiterate as the community board, this is a big issue for us as a local community. You know, just try.
And to remind you of the issue, here are the attachments.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, there's some really good information in that last.
I can't see how you know.
No, I can't do it.
Can I just ask, at some meeting that John wasn't at, there was talk on actually talking to the people that lived along that strip?
That was one of
Did we do it?
That was one of the first or second of this community.
You're going to get letters from the different organisations.
We'll have conversations.
I think it was last
I have spoken to a few people who live along that stretch, and they were all very willing to write letters.
It makes no sense that you go from 50 to 70 and to 50 again on a straight that's only got houses and the retirement village at the end of it. But that, we got that as a 50 hundreds of years ago as a result of young families living on that street.
Yeah.
And so since then, the process has changed, got harder. But it makes no sense to me. You could have 100 people saying it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I don't think those kind of letters are actually going to change much.
But isn't that what you want though? You want that backing support so that we're going to push that forward. You need to have this.
They're going to go on
compared to
numbers.
but
But who's going to do that? And who, so what kind of time?
But compared to a one-way, compared to turning a one-way bridge into a two-way bridge, it's a tiny project.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think, well, it's just changing a couple of signs.
And
There's
recirculate.
no doubt some underlying stuff underneath there, but it's not going to cost hundreds of thousands or millions.
No, but then you get, oh, sorry, I'm going to shut up.
Yeah.
Because it's neat, but it's,
Yeah, no, I know.
it went from a local to, we're going to have a national policy about this, so every school, etc., and it's just gone all over the place.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then they're saying, oh no, we're going to localise it. Oh, but we're going to nationalise the localising.
Did you just say we need to put a school in Coromandel Bay?
Yes, the school, that was the use of it.
Is there really one?
So through the chair, so like, we'll just organise a trial.
Yes.
And then, there as well as, you know, the attachments. Yeah. And then we'll just have to be really careful thinking about how that. Yeah.
And perhaps a way of Clancy knowing that we haven't forgotten it, that we are working, doing our bit. Like an email or something.
Thanks, Bruce and everyone. Thanks, Peter, for raising that. Any other items related to the action sheet?
Yes, did we discuss last meeting about the status of Sunshine closed? And I thought there was some discussion around, well, is it actually closed because
What are we talking about?
What are we?
on the action plan, under the action status is closed?
So what's closed?
But wasn't there some discussion over what had to have happened to then be closed? Or am I thinking of something completely different?
Is this the cemetery you're talking about?
No, general.
Or just the general items on there, like who's deciding that the issue's been closed? I know it's not always going to be that we've done something about it. Are you?
No,
it's not.
but actually, it probably should be us. Who makes the decision that that matter is now?
I presume that there's a process.
Well, the process was that Ed wrote an email, so that's closed. It's now been re-raised. So what it does is closed, but it's still here, but equally it could have been closed and gone. So it is a process.
Yeah.
And it'll still stay on the schedule.
We've now
It's
just
closed.
Reopen
Just reopen
that
it.
particular one.
It's just through the chair, if I can, it's a staff recommendation, staff position that license is closed based on what we've done. If we leave it on for one, so you can see it's closed.
Okay.
And if we have another discussion, like we can say, hey,
It's
before, then we can open it, the process. You guys do get to see it, but actually we don't agree with the staff. It's closed, can we reopen it? So it's always possible.
Excellent, thank you.
The only other thing I've got is relating to shelters. With Rotary, that project with Rotary and the Harry Rail Trail, and I had a meeting with Diane Drummond, and I think Derek was to be there, but he couldn't. So we looked at some sites relating to shelters, so that we could stimulate that whole project. It's only one shelter, it was about 20 shelters. Yes, we can Rotary. Yes, and some of it was going to be funded by Rotary. A lot of it was going to be funded by them, and some of it and other inputs. And we had a site designated for, in the end, where the cattle rent is. Marrimaroo Road, obviously.
Oh, the stock pound.
Well, the stock pound, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a site identified there, which is quite good because people biking from Thames to Coburg could just have a halfway look up Marrimaroo Road and see, the mountains in behind it and all the rest of it, and it's some sort of view site. So I'm just wondering if we've got the rest of it. Yeah, I see it's been closed.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean,
Because it was going to be a big important thing for Rotary to actually stimulate the whole thing.
Yeah, do you hear anything from Rotary about it? No, okay. Yeah, I'm not close enough to know.
So what's Derek close that I don't know, so Derek would be the one to talk.
I'll check with Derek and see if he's said from Rotary, if that's the process that Rotary were going to work with Derek on it. Yeah, I'll check with Derek and see who we've got to.
Yeah, if you could just get back to me, that would be very good.
Yeah. I know at least a couple of us, I think, got bailed up by Warren about how, yes, we're doing it, and then we're not doing it because so-and-so said something about the site or whatever. But yeah, I haven't heard anything from Warren about that.
Well, if that site proves to be inadequate, then we should be looking at other sites. It's really important to get it going.
Because I mean, they've got the templates and stuff for it, they just want to get on and do it.
Yeah. So Diane hasn't been well with Harry Rail Trail, so it's just gone on the back burner a little bit too. So, any other items? Everyone's happy? Move and second.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cheryl. Members' reports. Peter submitted a members' report. I take it as being read. Some questions related to those. Peter, do you want to?
Just in terms of my report, the update on the airfield, so there's offset what all happened today and what it is. Probably related to the Thames Business Association. And hopefully you got from the report that there's been some challenges. But talking with Heather yesterday and Sue, and following a briefing from the Swiss Army guy, Warren Sly, who's now on board of the Thames Business Association, as well as being on Rotary, as well as being the airfield of everything else. But managing sort of gets things happening. So the issues around what I call organisational dynamics and some of the conflict that was going on between the board board members and the chief executive. What's been reported to me is really significant progress has been made in terms of resolving those differences in establishing an effective working relationship, and that has been validated by all those three people I mentioned, Heather, Sue and Warren. This morning the board was meeting to specifically discuss the sustainability of the Thames Business Association. So that was the agenda item. That was why they were meeting this morning. But that is a critical thing that the association needs to address.
Definitely.
And I think probably I just want to emphasise that it feels to me like there's much more advocacy going on Thames Business Association, which I think we all feel has been a critical thing about what they need to be doing. There's still some events and stuff happening, but the advocacy and Greg referred a little bit to it this morning around the Mary Street and what people. So just by way of update on that.
Similarly, my report, just in Streets project, I had noted some concerns around risk of foreclosure, but just left it in that domain where have we assessed the risks or haven't we? I prefer the option of partial closure, working towards full closure, but that'll be discussed this afternoon. The 10-year plan, Sheree and I engaged with Andrew Bowden and Rob, and we wanted a billboard out of the sports ground, didn't we? I don't know if that's happened, Sheree, or were you got people at that level?
So I've since had some conversations with Andrew Bowden about that with billboard.
Yep.
And of course, at the point of conversation, Andrew wasn't kind of keen. We had since spoken to Rob, and Rob said it is to be done. And then we talked about where the billboard might need to go, considering that Rose Park is actually not really relying on sports out there at the moment. It'll start to happen around the end of March, April. So they will put one out there. We talked about putting one on the Creative Live building, which would mean that people crossing the street and stuff like that would be able to see it, particularly when it needs to be inside more than rather than it needs to be outside, just for the view. Having had another conversation with Andrew this week, the board is still the billboard hasn't been made yet. He's going to get Hannah Rose to do some design because they've kind of been thrust into the creative life here. One excuse that may be around.
Okay, well, we need to put some pressure on that because it's really important that sporting community camps
for the submission, which is where I kind of keep going down the track with them, because the thought was that if it got out there, people would see it and there would be that opportunity to make these submissions to the long-term plan. But if it's not up, you don't know what's out there.
Exactly.
And I've only got a few applications coming up.
The whole point of the exercise is that getting people to actually submit to the relocation of these facilities for teams, and in principle even.
Yeah, because it's need to be in principle because we haven't got the land.
Oh, yeah, just supporting it.
Yeah, no, we've got the land, but we haven't got the land use that's
Secured.
yeah.
But it's important in principle. Thames actually recognises the fact that it needs a sports ground and it needs an aquatic centre if it wants one in the future. So that in principle is really what people need to get out there and consolidate in relationship to, even if we just put up that plan of the space that we have purchased to do that, on the basis that it will go ahead. But if it doesn't go ahead, that's another story. But at least in principle, people are out there acknowledging the issue in terms of future sporting needs for our town. And I think that's really important. Well, we won't have a town without it. That's what it boils down to.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking, shall I catch it? But I know you're doing more than this report.
So that, I want to see some traction about that. Public Arts Trust had a meeting with Paul and Andrew regarding a few things there. The interwoven sculpture is now going to be stored at the depot of Dave Practice at the time being until the site was agreed upon, so I'm not quite sure where that's got to. I'll need to follow up with Jerry Thompson. It's wonderful. Has anyone seen the design and, you know, of the interwoven sculpture? Anyway, they've been busy with that. And then the next project, of course, is the speeding trains, which is a lot more technically challenging, as well as it's going to involve quite a lot of money. There was discussion around, you know, what's happening with the planters for our Mary Street upgrade. You would have seen some photos of Kylie's work. It's been fantastic. My concern there was, should we be engaging Erica Pierce and following through with the murals and different murals and the design or ideas of what should go on the planters. Good idea. I'm just so thrilled to see what Kylie's done. It's done. That's amazing. You know, that one of the fish and the other one of the turtle as well. Brilliant. So lots of talent in our town when you see things like that. Airfield, well, that's been well canvassed. Spatial planning, we've got a meeting on Thursday. 12:32, I think. So I'll be really interested to see some of the work that's been followed through with, in terms of that spatial planning for Thames. So hopefully we can get back to you with an update at some stage soon. Privet, so he's going to cover this afternoon, which is really neat. We had a bit of a discussion about that, and we also had a general discussion, which was really neat. And whether there's an opportunity to update us this afternoon, which I'll tell you about the appointment of the manager to see where that's going. That would be very nice. Yeah, that's my report. Thank you.
So, just to carry on from what happened, where it came from, I attended rugby sports AG and listened to a lot of what they talked about. I asked them at one point what was their appetite for the shift of Rose Park to tow truck, to which they said to me that they don't want to do that. It's been so long, it's been talked about so long, and they don't believe it's even going to happen, and you know, it was just a big, so I came back.
So mostly positively.
So basically what they said, why you're here to tell us this stuff that we're already done. Strat and I saw Rob and Andrew Bowman and had to talk about it, and it was quite clear to them that what I got when I went to the AGM was not what they had been hearing prior. So then it came about erecting a billboard to show what is possible, with the view that we would be able to talk further around our submissions to the plan to make sure that we kept it in the plan. And I know we pushed out $6.2 million out to the later years of the plan. My thought was that maybe it could, you know, we could move a few ones or twos forward to show that there is an intent to do stuff, because I think what's happening is the sports people, particularly the rugby sports club and possibly the netball, is that it's one of those things that we've heard it all, we've heard it all, we don't, you know, it's not happening. So anyway, that was the thought behind erecting the building. And then again, I've since had conversations around the billboard, because it hasn't happened, and now I think it might be. I also wanted to say that at the last meeting we had the Creative by Netball team, which they didn't win the series, which was really sad. They came third. Yes, they came third. They didn't get a prize for the box chocolates. Yeah. And actually, it turned out to be a really nice event for council staff, as opposed to, you know, what happened with netball qualified because we didn't have any competition. I attended Puru with Martin, and so there's a reserve in Te Puru which has had bollards installed where there was no public consultation. And so there are a few upset people in Te Puru, but however, we have had that sorted with Derek in terms of what they're going to do, because a lot of people are upset about the use of the public access, the vehicle public access, what they do up in the reserve, which is, do some wheelies with their cars and make some deals and put the net across the creek and catch all the fish, etc., etc. So they may have Derek's been on some plans around, so it might be sorted. And the last thing is that I've got a couple of AGMs coming up for sports.
Oh, thanks, Sean. So one of the things that comes out of your report to me is that we had an agreement to get this ball water to actually get public use going in relationship to our sporting needs for the town, and it hasn't happened. So it's really important that there's throughput with the enthusiasm of whatever you stated. So I'll follow up on it.
And I think there might be a under 13, what do they call it? They will get together at the start, is it a muster or something? I think that's actually coming up this month, so there will be people out there.
There'll be musters coming quite a bit now, because once we have the local AGM, which is next Monday, and they'll start, so the Thames Rugby Sports have their own teams, their club teams, so they'll muster. The rugby club will probably kick in and their musters will start as well.
Just thinking in terms of, having people out there, will probably need to be out there sooner rather than later.
I worry where it will be. I worry where it will be, where it will be seen, or where people will actually see it. Like if it's just hanging on the fence at the netball, of the netball courts,
whereas people
well,
drive
it just
by
gets lost with everything else.
We're having a workshop this afternoon, being briefed about the long-term plan comms. This sounds like part of the long-term plan comms. So we have this conversation when Laura's there talking about that, it might make sense. Because it's part of what you're talking about, this consultation.
So you can report something?
I just, in terms of council, the summer water's held, so that's really good. Fire, we've had 3 small fires, that was what was keeping the emergency management people awake, so far so good. Roading, the long-term plan has been a hard process, challenging. What's in, what's out, etc. We'll discuss that this afternoon. And the only other thing I want to say is that it's a bit like going back to work after a holiday. This community board hasn't met since the end of November. It's now the middle of February. It feels like we're doing a lot of catch up, and I would like an opportunity at a workshop sometime to explore how we connect in terms of formal meetings, workshops, and so that we're ready for when we're, sometimes we just get the dates of here are the meetings for 21, 22, and you say, oh shucks, we haven't even talked about that. So I'm just wanting to put that out there.
How we might gain some more continuity.
Yes, yes, and I acknowledge that we've had a gap in management as well, and over a Christmas period, so it's been a challenging time. And as that person comes on, how do we best pull it all together to make us rock? Because I know this is recorded, I want Thames to be, there are other community boards that have a lot of hot issues at the moment, and we have got some as well, and I want us to be really functioning to the highest standard we possibly can for the well-being of our communities. And we're never going to please everyone, but we have to be, whatever that is.
United.
Even if we disagree, then once we've made a decision, we have to be working in a way that we can all go forward with that collective decision making. Really important for my board.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I agree with that, Sarah.
Anything to report?
Yeah, just some very quick things. I'm meeting with the Thames Museum on Saturday to talk about funding. I've been having a look at the council's disability strategy. I'm not sure whether that's still current or not, but one of the comments that was made in there was that council hadn't actually put anything in place to bring that strategy about. And so I'm talking at the moment with various people about a dedicated forum for people with impairments, and that might be mental, physical, and that could be for clients, caregivers, agencies, but I think there is a social isolation forum that happens. I'm not sure how much traction that's gaining, and I could be quite wrong. I haven't been able to go to the last one, but I thought if we had a disability forum of some description, then that social isolation may be mitigated quite a lot. And the other thing that I've been involved in to do with Thames is with a group of people, including Mayor Gowdy, investigating the reasons why the waiting period for people to be able to sit their practical licences is 3 months. And that's what it is at the moment. Yeah. So there's a group of people that are getting quite concerned about that, and Mayor Gowdy has written a letter to NZTA asking for some reasons. So I'm very much involved in that too, because it's one of my passions is driving licences and all that stuff. So that's really it from me.
Thank you. Robin, okay, what time tonight, by the way?
It's
Okay. You said we've got some
yes.
That's interesting. 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I'll keep it short. I would try and keep it short. I really would encourage people to go over to Watson's Engineering outside the refuse station. Have a look at the planters there, and if you get to talk to the Watson's Engineering staff, because they'll probably come out if they see you looking at them, what they've done is great as far as having a place for people, for those planters to be able to go. And I was talking to them yesterday, and they're a little concerned if they have some students maybe painting them, but we discussed about maybe taking it across to the edge of the school within the fence area there to make it safe. But they're absolutely beautiful. We've got some really good artists, and yeah, I just want people to acknowledge Watson Engineering for what all the work they've done, and not just those planters, but with all the Thames public art stuff. I don't think a lot of this public art stuff would happen without Watson's Engineering support.
Yeah, there's been huge, hasn't it, right?
Yeah. Yep. Mary Street, yep, I've had 1 or 2 people have discussed that with me. And I don't want to sort of re-mitigate anything, but yeah, I don't think Greg's the only person who's been staying awake at night over it. The been on to several meetings with the Thames Heritage Network. They've got the Heritage Festival coming up in March. And Thames Heritage Network, I've been going along to a few of their meetings, and they seem to be getting, they've had other groups join them. St James's Church now has a representative coming along. Sue from TBA comes along as well, and also, I'm going to say Rachel, I think that's her name.
Rachel Paul.
Yes.
Yes.
One of the TCDC planners has been coming along as well, and it's just now got a good feel. They're talking about, and as the new person, Danielle talked about more collaboration events around that heritage and really making the most of most of it. But one common thing that has really come out today is around volunteers. Volunteers getting older and not being replaced. Sheree talked about Peru Reserve. I thought it was a good meeting we had on site now there with Derek and great one. Derek and
Doesn't matter.
People. And yeah, the other one of the things Connect with Mary Street has been around, on building 10 Bond Street people. And yeah, there's some preliminary discussion going on with a couple of social groups, social agencies around yeah, some sort of response to that situation not getting any better. And yeah, so I just want to leave it at that.
Thanks, Mark. Yep.
I'll be very brief, I'll be like briefly one. And I've been having a lot of conversations with people about various things, and every time I speak to somebody, in particular if it's about councillors, I really encourage them to participate in the long-term plan process and say, these things are all going to be in the long-term plan, or that's a great idea, can you please look at the long-term plan? And so just, I wanted to encourage you all to do the same, because obviously it's, the more voices we get, the better when we're making these big decisions. And the other thing people have been talking to me about, and that's been on my brain because I've been cutting that down in my own house, is privet. So I'm pleased that we're talking about it this afternoon. And I did, Cheryl, before we came in this morning, you said something about, you know, it'd be great if we did some team building. So I'm going to suggest that we go up into the hills with my saw and we do some team building, come up with it.
My neighbours.
Or at Sherry's neighbour's house, or my house.
You're so gorilla.
No, I can't hide this. Anyway, it's just.
I got a gorgeous little choice,
I'll
stone
leave it on there.
chainsaw.
I'm putting it in.
Epic.
Maybe we can talk about that.
I'll move
later.
that we receive the.
I'll second it.
And I also move that we move into committee.
Can you have a quick break first?
No, it's finished because there's minutes and then the meeting's over and then we have to do the workshop. So I'm just,
I'll second that.
all right, so I'm moving that. And then we're in committee. That was all I was doing. I was just.
I follow.
Hurrying it up.
Yeah. Because I'm normally this people. I am.
So you'll second it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's for the.
Yeah, so we move to.
Yeah.